Okay. I do indeed believe we are live. So, hello and welcome everyone. I am joined today by Jesse Singal, who you might notice as a tier above some of the chuds that I normally talk to. He's a real writer who writes real things. And we had a higher tier chud with a glorious mane. Right. So we had a disagreement on Twitter. And as Twitter does, it got real explosive for like 4 or 5 posts, and then instantly in DMs, it calmed down. That's what Twitter does. So, and Jesse was kind enough to take me up on an invitation to talk about this live on stream. So, with all that interesting mystery out of the way, Jesse, can you kind of lay out the case and the topic that we're discussing today, if you wanted to introduce that? One sec. Wait. 1 sec. Apparently you're muted. Okay, so let's make sure this is coming through. Because it likes to do that. Properties, device default. Okay, can you speak for me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Okay, I think, yeah, we got it now.
Cool.
Thank you, computer. All right,
yeah,
let's just make sure, because it's showing up in the meters, but let me make sure. And this is the delay, so everyone who's responding right now, I apologize. Takes about 20 or 30 seconds. Okay, we're good. Cool. All right. I'm sorry about that. That was my own ineptitude. So please continue.
Yeah, this was a study published by Lisa Littman in PLOS One, I believe, in 2018. She's a doctor, researcher at Brown University. She was looking into this idea of rapid onset gender dysphoria. So she went to these communities online of parents who were skeptical. We got to be really careful with language here. From one angle, you could say they're skeptical their kids are really trans. The other is they're skeptical their kids have gender dysphoria, because those are overlapping but not identical things. But either way, she basically sought to get information on this idea that kids are made to think they're trans or have gender dysphoria as a result of the internet or peer pressure or the culture at large. And that's it's an explosive idea, because from many trans people's perspectives, I'm going to explain why I think this is not a great analogy, but from their point of view, it's like saying, watching Will and Grace will turn your teenager gay. It's just a misunderstanding of the nature of identity. So there was a big blow up when the paper came out. Brown University took down its press release about it. PLOS One did this sort of post-publication review that I found unusual, that we'd probably disagree on. They changed some wording and stuff, but when I emailed them, they confirmed to me there was nothing actually correct. So it's now listed as a correction that adds certain context to specific claims.
Okay. All right, so I wouldn't disagree with anything in that. So I think something that I want to make clear here is, so for example, are you familiar with the Sweden study? If I say the Sweden study, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, that's the long one. Well, there are multiple ones because they have really good sort of public health records. There was one that people sometimes use to say the suicide rate is high.
That's the one I'm talking about. Yeah. So my issue with I promise there's a parallel here. My issue there is not the study itself. The study, like in the Sweden study, the study itself is fine. Nothing is wrong with the methodology. The issue comes with poor interpretations of that study. And I think there's something extremely similar to what Littman did. I want to say does and did at the same time.
But I'm a writer. It's done. DUD is the past tense.
There you go. He done it. So it wasn't necessarily the methodology of the study was flawed, although there were some issues here, and we'll get into some language that Littman likes to use that makes me question her neutrality a little bit later if you want to. But by far my largest issue is the way this study was taken by a lot of transphobic sites that made me genuinely question if people are capable of reading words. Like, it was an embarrassing lack of understanding of the scientific process and what this study itself was trying to say. So, for example, like a ton of sites said, like, Breitbart, LifeSite News, Mumsnet, the American College of Pediatricians, which is the conservative advocacy group, not the actual medical organization, and a bunch of other sites, both when the study came out and when Brown took down the press release, just did not represent the study accurately whatsoever. And I think it's very reasonable when you have a study that comes out like this, even though the findings in the study might be perfectly okay. And to her credit, I can actually quote Lisa Littman here. In the original version of it. Let me see. Scroll all the way down. Please tell me I can find it when I highlight. Yeah, this is not a prevalent study and does not attempt to evaluate the degree to which this presentation of a socially mediated onset of gender dysphoria or the use of the drive to transition as a maladaptive coping mechanism is widespread in the population. So she said that. To her credit, she did say that. And you would not get that impression from reading any of the press releases from those sites. And in my opinion, Littman, and I could be completely wrong here, just completely ignorant of what she's done. In my opinion, she has not done enough to address those misinterpretations of her study. I could be completely wrong about that. It's just something that I haven't seen. And contrast that with the author of the Swedish study, Cecilia Degini. It's Swedish. There's like 9 consonants in a row.
Some weird
Degini. Anybody in chat wants to tell me how it's pronounced? Actually came out and said, and like had multiple instances where she said, "Stop interpreting this study like this." Yeah. So I've been talking for a while. I'm sorry.
No. I mean, I think that's true. I think we agree. I thought Littman made it pretty clear that this wasn't a prevalent study. That was sort of, as you pointed out, that's sort of the stats 101 here. Is she sought out parents who believe their mostly daughters had gone through this experience. And I disagree with the right-wing framing on this in multiple ways. And what most concerns me about the discourse around it, and I think, I don't think we could figure out what we actually disagree with. I don't view us as on different sides. I think on 95% of this we'd probably agree, including kids transitioning. What worries me about the discourse is you have on the one side, you have conservatives who say, ROGD is claiming our daughters, and you have some people on the left saying that too. On the other hand, you have people saying, oh, social and cultural influence doesn't factor into kids' sense of their own gender, which I think is impossible if you know about adolescent, identity development. So I get emails from parents who are like, oh, my daughter has ROGD. What should I do? And I don't like that because you don't know your daughter has ROGD. We don't know. It's not a well-established phenomenon.
Yeah, it's not an official medical diagnosis, right?
It's not. And I would never, diagnose from afar like, yep, your daughter has RGD, you should talk her out of being trans. That's horribly irresponsible. But I do think it's similarly irresponsible to ignore the fact that we still don't know about sort of classic early onset gender dysphoria. There's a lot we don't know about it. There's much less we know about. There is a strain of gender dysphoria that appears to start in adolescence. And I think in some cases, maybe there was stuff going on all along that the parents or the teenager didn't notice. But having talked to these kids and their parents, they're not like all right-wing plants or something. It's a thing that happens, and you can understand how it would happen. So I wish we could find maybe this chat will help in a small way, just like tone down the temperature of the conversation a little bit, because I think a lot of people involved just want what's best for their kids, and it's just got to be. This stuff is complicated. Like if you spend, I'm obviously not an expert. I'm obviously not trans. I have spent dozens of hours talking to the top clinicians in the country who work with these kids, and their work is actually very careful and compassionate and more complicated either than saying immediately, yep, you're trans, let's transition you, or what they would never say is, no, you're not trans. Like they don't do either of that. It's a much more sort of complicated process. Yeah,
and I'm really hoping that we kind of established this, that we want to have a nice conversation that would improve the discourse, especially with my audience. Both of my audience are probably going to listen to us really, really well. That was a bad joke. That didn't land. I'm sorry.
No, you have a few thousand viewers. You're building a channel, and I think a lot of them probably don't trust me because I have a bad reputation on this subject. But I'm happy to sort of explain my position or answer your questions or their questions.
Sure. So, and obviously, I can't speak for anybody on my side. I can only speak for myself. But for what it's worth, I do think that culture does play an influence in all of our identities. Like we say that gender is a social construct. So, of course, no matter what sort of role genetics plays, culture is going to influence our identities. That's just how things work. This disconnect between mind and body, or nature and nurture, just isn't borne out in any sort of scientific data. These two things are not separate. So it really doesn't matter to me whether or not an identity like being trans or being gay, it doesn't really matter to me whether it's all genetic or all cultural. To me,
No.
the issue is this a bad thing to be? And does it cause harm to the person or other people? And if so, should we take steps to avoid it? And I think one of the biggest issues that I took with the actual study is the use of language. She used things like cluster outbreaks, social contagion. She compared being trans to things like eating disorders.
But this is one of my gripes because I was rewatching her video today to make sure she's talking about gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is listed in the DSM. Maybe it shouldn't be. As of now, gender dysphoria itself is a mental illness. Maybe we'll look back at that and say it shouldn't have been. But you can talk about a cluster of gender dysphoria in theory the same way you would talk about a cluster of depression or anxiety. It's a symptom. It's not an identity. If she was saying there was a cluster outbreak of like boys wanting to wear girls' clothing, I would agree with you that that's offensive because who the hell cares? Boys can wear whatever they want. Girls can wear whatever they want. But what people do is they do this slippery rhetorical move where she says, I think gender dysphoria could be spread through. Oh, sorry, let me turn this off. She says, I think gender dysphoria could spread through social networks, which is, in my view, a reasonable idea, given that most mental health conditions can. And then that gets flipped to, oh, she's saying being trans is. So I just think we need to be clear. Are we talking about being trans or having gender dysphoria?
Ooh, no, she actually did say, I'm quoting verbatim from the original article, the cluster outbreaks of transgender identification occurring in friendship groups. Now, to your credit, she did say gender dysphoria, so I just control F'd, and most of them she was referring to gender dysphoria, but at least once, it's on page 32 out of 41. I don't know how. That's just how journal pages work. She did at least once refer to it as transgender identification. So there's that.
I could see how people could find that insensitive for sure. I just think teenagers are affected by their friends, and I don't. The ones I've talked to, it's like they went through different phases where they were cis, and then they were genderqueer, then they were non-binary, then they were trans man. No one has a problem with that. The problem came up when they told their parents they wanted to go on hormones, and their parents were like, we think there's maybe some other mental health stuff going on that we want to take care of first. And that, to me, is just like what good parents should do. I've had trouble because there was a huge negative response to my Atlantic article. And you could definitely argue, like, I didn't focus on the most common outcomes or whatever, although I would reply, we don't know anything. We have no data. The data sucks. It's all from one.
The data on what? I'm sorry.
That's a fair question. I'd say.
I'm sorry. You cut out for a second. Can you just repeat the last 5 seconds?
Sure. The data we have suck. I never know what you're supposed to.
The data suck. Yeah.
The data suck, and it mostly comes from one clinic in the Netherlands that had much more gatekeeping than what advocates are calling for here. The Amsterdam clinic really had a lot of gatekeeping. So. Yeah, I guess at the end of the day, like it strikes me as likely that for a subset of kids, there might be some peer influence. So you just need compassionate clinicians who will talk them through this and figure out sort of the source of their distress. And I've had trouble finding anyone who can explain to me what is it that's not compassionate about making that argument.
For what it's worth, I'm all aboard on basically everything you just said. I do want good treatment. I do want very careful diagnoses of things. I do want any kind of medical treatment, and this applies to a broad spectrum of basically all medical treatments. It should be done very, very carefully, and with a lot of the care and compassion that you're talking about. Again, since we're talking about the discourse, a lot of the discourse surrounding that is not focused on that. A lot of it was dishonest framing, and honestly, and I'm sure this is where we don't disagree. And because you said as much, the discourse surrounding this article has been pretty poisonous. And Littman herself, you can never know someone's intentions, but I think she's less neutral than she's letting on. Or she's less neutral than...
Neutrality is tricky here because I've encountered a lot of people who you might agree that there should be, actual diagnostic processes for 14-year-olds. A lot of people I've encountered don't think that. And I think that that's just gatekeeping in the same way it would be gatekeeping for a 25-year-old, where I think there shouldn't be much gatekeeping for a 25-year-old. So I think, I don't like the way conservatives have latched onto this, but I thought, as you pointed out in your video, if you're studying a new phenomenon for the first time, you're going to use convenience samples. You're not going to do no who anywhere has done a fully representative national study of the trans population. Like UCLA sort of came
Yeah, I
close
was
to
about
it.
to say that. That's the closest that
It's
we've come to it.
impossible. So that was my gripe, is that people, again, I would not tell people to go to the Federalist to sum up that study, but the study
Oh
itself was
no,
like,
God.
yeah, I thought the study itself just used, she pointed her archives of sexual behavior, ran a follow-up article by her where she pointed out that a lot of these studies supporting affirmative treatment did the same things. It was convenience samples. It was reaching out to specific
That's
communities.
true, but
So
some of the comparisons she made in that article were tenuous at best. Like for example, she brought up the let's see, the Olson reports,
yeah,
and the Olson report that was called mental health. On the Olson report, mental health of transgender children who are supported in their identities, published in uh, pediatrics.
yeah,
She brought up that as a comparison, both for because it was a study of parental reports, just like hers, and it was
yeah.
also a semi-convenience sample. But I thought that connection is pretty tenuous because I mean the study was called. Was about parental support of their kids, so maybe a parental reports would be a little bit more applicable. Of course, it's not the same as measuring the kids, but also this convenience sampling, I think is pretty. That one I don't buy at all because the Olson study had two control groups, whereas the Littman study did not. I don't think it's the same thing when you're talking about convenience sampling. When you include control groups, of course you can still have a convenience sampling in that case, but it's not going to be as biased as if you don't include control groups.
Well, but think about it this way: if Christina Olson had been doing the first ever study of a group of, I think it's apples to oranges, because Christina Olson's sample is asking whether transitioning kids early has any negative consequences, and so far she's found it does not. I thought what Littman was doing, she's not talking about whether these kids do well in the long run. She's just trying to subjectively lay out what the phenomenon is. So it's not clear to me what a control group would even be useful there if she
Well,
herself isn't making prevalence claims.
well, yeah, exactly. That's I think that's a very fair point. These are apples and oranges, which is why I don't agree that Littman is making this comparison between her methodology and the Olsons.
Well, but what she's saying is that she's saying if you're going to criticize my study for using parental report, if parental report in and of itself is the issue, or convenience sampling is in and of itself the issue, why wouldn't you ding Christina Olson for the same thing? And so I think that's fair. And I think what she's pointing out is what people are mad about is the outcome, the suggestion ROGD is real. Like, don't you think if people said, let's say her study was conducted flawlessly in your eyes and the eyes of others, but it came to the same conclusion, which is we think ROGD is real. The Federalists took advantage of it as they would. National Review. I think you guys would be equally pissed. You just find some other reason to be mad about it. You don't. You don't.
Maybe,
Yeah.
but like I said, the methodological problems I have to study are not. I mean, it's just normal limitations of studies. All that I think is fine, but I think honestly, I wish I had seen. This was published just after my video, so I didn't get a chance to see it. But her letter in Archives of Sexual Behavior, I would have used the shit out of this. I mean, in my video, in my opinion, this is written like a shit post. This is the most shit posty academic letter I've ever seen written. Like, for example, like she says that why has the response to my publication been so intense? I think it's
Oh,
because
wait,
I
shit. Sorry,
challenge.
I just pulled something up. Can you repeat that last part? You cut out.
She asks, "Why has the response been so intense?" It's I now believe that the potential implications of Littman and the emerging realities of lived experiences of detransitioners have been perceived as threatening to the gender affirmative care model. It is possible that indeed they might be a threat. That's not neutral scientific language, and also the intense response that she got was pretty mild, all things considered. Like. She cited directly. Let's see, where is it? Come on. Oh no, I didn't close it, did I? No, she cited directly like a something. Please tell me I saved this. I'm gonna be really mad if I didn't. Yeah, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. She directly cited their response to it, and this response is mild. Like it's saying like this is
Sure. No, I agree.
not
So
yeah.
the I'm not trying to talk over you. The
No, go
WPATH
ahead.
response was measured and mild, and I heard a little bit about the sort of background of how they tried to craft that, and there was some controversy. The response to her paper, in my view, online was not mild. It is not. I mean, you'd have to look back for the last. I know, as you pointed out in your video accurately, the paper wasn't retracted. It is pretty unusual for Brown or any university to pull down something and issue a sort of a borderline apology. So I guess, it seems to me that if a lot of trans people are saying, we don't think ROGD is real, we think this is has the effect of invalidating our identities, I take them at their word. I think that's the problem, is with the concept itself. I don't think there's any methodological innovation that would have made them accept the conclusion that in some cases something like ROGD is going on.
Well, I think this is something that I'm really surprised. So this, the letter that you sent me, that was published in Archives of Sexual Behavior, and I'm saying it out loud for the stream. The use of methodologies in Littman 2018 is consistent with the use of methodologies in other studies contributing to the field of gender dysphoria research. Response to Restar 2019. I just said that for the stream. Sorry. It's not a pithy, catchy title. This was a response to Restar, who I referenced in my video, and some of the main points that Restar made, again, I've read this front and back, and maybe I missed it, but she didn't address the biggest problem that I pointed out in my video, and the one I thought that Restar made the most fuss about was a priori knowledge of how the results are going to turn out. This wasn't addressed in Littman's response. Like, I think that's the biggest one. She knew how these parents were going to respond to her questionnaire pretty consistently.
Well, no, she knew that they were skeptical of their kids' trans identity. Like if I do a study of rock climbers to find out about their political affiliations, you couldn't then ding me for being like, well, you knew they were going to be rock. I think there's two levels of what you're saying, and I get what you're saying, but I don't think she knew exactly. A big part of her paper is just sort of qualitative, just like accounts of what these mostly moms think they went through with their daughter. I don't think she knew the answers to those. I think that was the point of gathering the data. But I think we go around in circles on the same point, which is like she knew these kids were skeptical of their or their parents were skeptical of the kids' trans identities.
No, she knew that these parents thought their kids were suffering from rapid onset gender dysphoria. Yeah. So
different way of saying the same thing. But the paper wasn't attempting to evaluate the prevalence. It was to try to learn more about this thing that, from her point of view, from a scientific point of view, may or may not be real. And I just don't know how you could have run a study like this without $5 million of government funding that could have done what this one did.
I'll try. If you want to push funding into the sciences, I'm right there with you, especially replication studies. Yeah, I think we are going in circles just a little bit, because I don't think we disagree all that much on how the study was conducted. It was just all the discourse surrounding it. So is there anything, like, any way you would defend the study and the use of it and how people are using it?
No, I mean, okay, so I did an article in the Atlantic that made similar points, and there was a massive freak out about that. And
which one was that? Which Atlantic? Was it the when children say they're trans?
Yeah.
Okay.
In my experience, you get a lot of heat for treating this in the same way you would treat other sort of health and science issues. And maybe that's why I'm sympathetic to Littman. Like, you could say the same thing about my situation. The article wasn't corrected because nothing was wrong with it. It wasn't retracted. But I felt, and editors felt, that like you're going to have some issues if you cover this issue in a certain way. And I think that's why, unfortunately, like National Review and the Federalist and a lot of right-wing outlets I don't trust as much are sort of picking up the baton, and you see they're adopting ROGD as their great cause now, which is not good. I don't want social conservatives being the ones who sort of interpret this work. And I wish, like, there's so many ways the ROGD study could have been covered in a more balanced way, include like the way we're doing it on the stream, where it doesn't sound like you think this was like race science. It sounds like you had particular problems with some phrasing, but I don't think we even, again, like, I haven't heard a good answer from you about how you could start to study a phenomenon you think might be real without pissing people off, like on the grounds they were mad about her study.
I think you would have to. A lot of it is how you collect your sample. Like you could, for example, go to a gender clinic, and instead of taking like everybody who goes to the gender clinic, you could say like, well, here are the people who we think match these symptoms, and let's see what they all have in common, or something like that. Instead of going to specific sites that are, I think it's very fair to say these are blatantly transphobic sites. Do you disagree with that at all?
Yeah, I disagree a lot, and we can talk about that. But I don't.
Sure.
I think
the sites we're talking about are Fourth Wave Now, Transgender Trend, and Youth Trans Critical Professionals, with a fourth site, a Facebook page added in for the corrections, but I don't count that one.
Yeah. Well, I guess it depends how you define. Okay, so to me, um, the evidence we have for adults in transitioning is just older and better than what we have for kids.
Mhm.
The evidence we have for youth is low quality. It comes from one clinic basically in the Netherlands.
In
So
terms of detransitioning,
no,
or
in terms of whether going on
persistence rate
hormones.
rather.
Well, these are two different things. Sorry. Starting first was just a question of whether it's a good idea to put gender dysphoric kids on hormones. We have basically one cohort of kids from the Netherlands.
You
Where
mean
we've
puberty
tracked
blockers?
puberty blockers and hormones, both.
When you say kids, we just got to be real specific here.
Oh yeah, sure. So the Amsterdam clinic, I forget the exact ages, but you would go on puberty blockers a little bit before puberty starts, like right at the very start of puberty,
12-ish.
the first signs of puberty. Yeah, 11 or 10 sometimes.
Yeah.
And then in that clinic, the usual thing is you can't be on puberty blockers that long because it messes up your calcium, your bone structure. So then you go on to hormones, maybe a couple of years later. So um, if someone says to me, I'm fine with adults transitioning. I have major qualms about kids because I don't think we have good evidence yet. And I'm a little bit worried about blocking puberty. I would disagree with them because I think the evidence is okay, but no one thinks this is like strong evidence. And I talked to a lot of gender affirming clinicians for my story who all told me the same thing, which is we're all operating in the dark a little bit. So I don't think that's a fair boundary for transphobia to say, I'm against bathroom bills. I'm in favor of trans rights. With kids, I'm nervous and I want to see more data. I think that's not a crazy position.
I don't think it's crazy either. The issue I have is like, how do you get the data? Like
So this is the thing.
Yeah.
You're pointing out that it would be better for Littman to go to get gender clinic data. As far as I know,
This is just an idea.
Yeah, no, and I agree that would be better. There's basically no gender clinics in the U.S. that do either what the controversial Zucker Clinic in Canada or the Amsterdam Clinic do, where they just track kids over time, and you need those longitudinal studies. So there's one, I think it's called CHOP, not to be confused with the
not the other one.
Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, sorry, CHLA. I think they have a cohort of kids. They're gathering some data, but other than that, Littman would have had like nothing, nowhere to get that data. So again, I just think her method wasn't ideal, but I just think for a first pass attempt to understand this phenomenon, I don't know.
Oh, well, why conduct the study in the first place though? If your methodology is going to be that poor, and again, I think the methodology was really, really, really weak. Nothing wrong with it. You can absolutely do the study, and I think the results of the study are valid in terms of like how the survey data was, and even like the themes that she found in the data. I mean, they're no more tenuous or vacuous than other themes you find in surveys. She made a lot of themes for how small her sample size was, but all that stuff was fine. But why conduct a study if you're going to have like that poor of a pool to draw from? And if
because she didn't intend for this to be a big sweeping representative study. This is her first pass at understanding what she thinks is a real phenomenon, and there needs to be an open debate about whether it is. And I say that having again talked to kids so there's a subset of parents who reach out to me for their like horror stories where I'm just like, not knowing the details, it seems like they just don't want a trans kid, and that's what's motivating their fears about ROGD. There's another subset of parents I've talked to, and in some cases met the kids, where I'm like, yeah, this is basically what happened. Kids get confused sometimes. It doesn't invalidate the trans experience to say there's a proportion of kids who, if they're going through some other sort of whatever, anxiety, stress, puberty sucks.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I'm fully supportive of people who detransition. Like, if you explored this identity, if you were a kid and you like, maybe I'm gonna play around with non-binary or other trans identities for a couple of years, and it's just not for you, I think that's perfectly fine.
It's fine. It's harmless.
It's fine. It's harmless unless you go on to say that, and therefore no kid should we should stop people transitioning.
Yeah, and I think some of the people who support Littman's study take too harsh a stance against transition. I don't, because again, the modal youth gender dysphoria story involves a kid who has felt this way for a very long time, and where often there appears to be a strong biological component. Because a kid at 2 who's deeply dysphoric, like there wasn't really much room for culture or nurture to affect that. It's just these kids are different, man. That's all I'm saying. And again, I'm all I can give you is anecdotes because that's all we have. Because Littman's the only person who studied it. But like, you could have one of these kids on. They're not like. It's just I don't know why am I supposed to believe that this is the one area of adolescent life that's somehow immune from social and cultural influence? This thing, gender identity, which is not
I
an
think
easy
I
concept.
well, yeah, and I think that's where it comes down to like there's a conflation, and I'm not saying you're making it, but there's a lot of conflation that if it's socially influenced, if it didn't come from your genes, which is a nonsense phrase because everything you do comes from your genes, but then it must be bad. It's not real. Like one of the biggest fights that we made for gay rights was like, we're born gay, we can't change it, and to me, I hate that argument because
It doesn't matter.
yeah,
It's
like
a naturalist fallacy.
yeah, it's like saying that okay, the only reason you should respect my rights is because I can't change, which implies that if I could change, I probably should. And I really hate that argument.
You think in any rights battle, you probably need like a
Yeah, I'm saying it was a necessary first step, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's true with it is true that like there's a subset of trans people where it's such a deep part of them that they don't really have a choice to live as their biological sex. Like that's not realistic to ask of them. So I think that in terms of trans 101, that's an important thing to explain to people. But then it's absolutely true. Like if someone really wants to transition and it gets tricky, but I don't have nothing's just nature, nothing's just nurture. It's all complicated. My only point is like none of the people who view me and a handful of other contrarian liberal writers as like Hitler adjacent on this can really explain to me, like, do you really think 15-year-olds don't get confused and that there shouldn't be some safeguards? And I don't know. I find that frustrating, but I also like the correspondence I get from people not on Twitter is overwhelmingly positive. So I don't even know what we're fighting about at this point. It's just such a culture war thing. I hate it. I hate that.
Yeah, yeah, and I agree too. I wish there was a lot more nuance. I wish there was a lot more open dialogue, but also I can see a lot of, especially trans people, because I'm not trans, but I can see a lot of my trans friends are really skeptical and really wary of any sort of I'm just asking questions style
Sure.
of argument, and a lot of people. So, for example, do you know who Lisa Marciano is?
She's a Jungian therapist who's very into RGD.
Very into ROGD. I would consider pretty transphobic. For example, she retweets the LGB Alliance, and there's nuance, and then there's pretending that the LGB Alliance isn't an explicitly transphobic group. Yeah. She retweets them a lot, and she's someone who Lisa Littman went to for help and revisions on her study. So this is someone that Lisa Littman trusted to review it. And Lisa Marciano, I'm just resetting what I said in my video, endorses like Ray Blanchard's pretty crackpot theories, in my opinion, and in the opinion of a lot of the academic community. She, for example, here's a sentence. This is one single sentence out of one of the papers that Littman referenced in her letter that she published. It is clear that social transition must be viewed as a treatment that carries with it a significant risk of progressing to medical transition. This is not neutral scientific language. This is painting medically transitioning as a bad thing, hence the term risk.
Well, no, she's saying that there are risks and downsides to medically transitioning, which there are. I'm not sure I agree with her weighing of the evidence, but I mean, this is sort of what I mean about like treating this as any other. I'm with you on the just asking questions thing, because also like the aspect of this that I find heartbreaking and hard to break through is like if you were a 40 or 45-year-old trans person and you fought for access to hormones for decades and no one believed you when you said who they were. Here's some asshole who isn't trans saying, well, maybe we should slow things down with kids. I don't have an answer for that except that.
Also, Lucy Marciano is a liar who can't read studies.
I know, but like in the grand scheme of things, this is a very small and incestuous world.
It is. This is something. Yeah. Sorry.
Lisa Marciano, whatever you think about her, does not have much influence, and I would argue that making this an online culture war thing, I don't know. I think parents go to sources you don't like because they don't. I just don't find the way this is presented to be, not by you in particular. I've just been distraught. And look, I have a book coming out on a totally unrelated issue. I've got other stuff going on. I don't.
I got you. No, I got you. I got you.
Wish there was a better way to have the conversation.
I'm sorry, you cut out again just for like 5 seconds.
No, I'm just saying everybody knows that 15-year-olds have fuzzy identities and don't know who they are, need some guidance.
Sure.
I don't think anyone's arguing about the basics here.
Oh yeah,
Although,
sure.
do you just think ROGD is a myth? Do you think there's some kids for whom this applies?
I
Or
think there's a big parallel to be made between ROGD and autogynephilia. It probably exists. Like some people probably did it. Some people probably wanted to be trans to be cool. Like those people probably exist, but nowhere near to the extent that you can make a claim that this is a problem. Like let's say, okay, for example, let's say ROGD did exist.
yeah.
Who cares? Why would that be a less valid way of wanting to transition? Let's say you just decided one day that you wanted to transition. Why is that
Oh,
bad?
that's easy. Oh, that's easy because like the gender clinician 101 is the first thing you do is you try to figure out if a kid's sense of identity. Okay, so the classic example is a 5-year-old comes in and they say, I want to be a girl. And you say, why? And they say, well, I don't like playing soccer with boys. So you'd be like, well, the goal in that case, you wouldn't say you should transition. You'd say, you're a kid. You don't understand gender roles. So if a 15-year-old, the example I've heard, for example, and I know.
Oh, wait, hold on. Let's stick on the 5-year-old.
Yeah.
Like, why? So obviously for a 5-year-old, we wouldn't do anything medically. It would just be a social transition. So why not?
Sorry, you're saying we should socially transition a boy because he doesn't.
No, I'm saying like, why make it a transition thing at all? Why not just let this kid adopt whatever kind of identity that they want to, as long as it's like, why not let them wear dresses and go by she/her pronouns or whatever pronouns that they pick?
Oh, I mean, I think if you talk to the kid for a while and they still want to transition, you'd consider that. But my point is, a lot of gender clinicians say that kids have very unsophisticated notions of gender because their brains are this big. So the classic example is a kid thinking that because he doesn't like male activities like soccer, he's a girl. And if that's what's driving the desire to transition, you wouldn't want that kid to transition. You'd want him to learn he could be a boy who doesn't like soccer.
Yeah, but would it be a bad thing to, as an option in the immense ways of exploring your identity, would it be bad to make that an option? Like, okay, try out being a girl for a little while.
No, it probably wouldn't do much harm, but it's just like it would be. Why? If that was really the reason a kid had gender issues, and that's not a gender issue, that's chafing against gender roles. What would be the point of the kid transitioning if it's just about sports or hair or something? If there isn't like a deep there's 5-year-old kids who are deeply dysphoric and basically feel it seems like they need to transition. Yeah, I just think there's. Sorry, the question was why does ROGD matter? To me, it obviously. This is so. Do you know the names Diane Ehrensaft and Erica Anderson?
Erica Anderson sounds a little bit familiar, but not.
These are two of the most famous gender clinicians in the country. Erica is herself trans, and what they both told me when I interviewed them for the story was they've seen in their office signs that kids are. What they're telling them doesn't really come from the kid, but it comes from their peer network. So Diane, who is no one's idea of a transphobe, everyone loves her. She was one of the pioneers in writing about early social transition. She said that kids will come into her office and sound like they're reciting something they got from a message board. So Diane's job as a responsible clinician is to say, how much of this is you? How much of this is just shit you see online that you haven't really thought through because you're 12? So that's what I mean. That's why ROGD matters. If ROGD exists and kids can quickly develop a trans identity as a result of something very much extrinsic to them that might not stick around, that would suggest you should, just slow down the process a little bit and not rush to transition. And not that there's that many. There are some clinicians who do that, who are just irresponsible.
Well, of course, yeah, of course. I mean, that's true of all clinicians, especially mental health. Like there's a ton of kids who probably were just day one, here's your nine bottles of Ritalin because you watch cartoons too much or something like that.
Yeah,
and those clinicians probably definitely do exist. So yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that at all. Which is why I would love to see more research. I would love to see more funding into this specific topic. What I don't like is I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot, so I'm trying to phrase it a different way. I can't really say anything new. I don't like the discourse surrounding it. I don't like it that a lot of people who don't know how to read studies or intentionally lie about it are taking this to be something that it isn't because it has poisoned discourse a lot. This is an anecdote, personal anecdote. It means nothing in terms of the overall conversation, but I see ROGD come up a lot because I fight on Twitter daily because I spend my time wisely and I'm very healthy. So
similar. I can't really fault you for that.
Yeah, so I see it come up a lot online that ROGD people are just being tricked into being trans by their social group and things like that. And it's you can't have a conversation about this because when you ask them for proof, they come up with a study, and the study ostensibly does not prove that. So
I know, but I've had just as many run-ins with people who say 14-year-olds aren't influenced by their peers when it comes to gender, which is ridiculous. Like there's dumb people on both sides, which is why this has to be a conversation. It's also why on your channel you should just, there are clinicians who are A, themselves trans, and who are B, in the general camp that assessment is important. So not to criticize you, but the last video you did on this, you relied on research from someone who I'm sure is very smart, but is just a random person on Twitter. There are so many people, clinicians you could.
Oh, sorry. Last video I did on this on this subject, or last video I did?
Yeah, or the one I watched. The one.
Okay, I got you. Yeah.
You could reach out to Littman. You could reach out to Erica Anderson. You could reach out to the people I'm not saying they represent all of clinicians' opinion, but like, why should this be about like the idiots you argue with on Twitter? Why not talk to actual clinicians and get their views?
If you wanted my true opinion on that is like, I don't think I'm important enough to talk to these people yet.
I mean, I'll put in a good word. If you think, I mean, again, maybe they're tainted by their association with me, but the point is like, this should not be, and I've contributed to the toxic climate myself in certain ways, but it shouldn't be about like shit posting, and it shouldn't be about the dumb right wingers, the dumb left wingers you come across in your Twitter feed. There's much more at stake here, and in the next 5 years, millions of families are going to have to figure this out. And it's on you and other people who think that RGD is overstated to make that argument to them and to make it on the basis of as sound evidence as possible. And for me, I'm firmly in the camp that I think more assessment is good. And I also think gender identity is such a fuzzy concept. I can't even define what it means to feel like a boy. So I think we should be very
it's really tough. Now, there is research out there that says that gender identity is in part rooted in genetics, at least. So there is a biological contribution to gender identity.
Well, or to dysphoria, because they're different things.
No, I'm saying gender identity, which could follow up with gender dysphoria if your gender identity is, like, for example, with sexual orientation. Like, you could have I'm using big swathing air quotes here, traditional female sexual orientation, which is you like men, but you could be born with the dangly bits. And that's might have been what happened with me. And the same thing could happen with gender identity. Like, you have to, on some level, know what you have and what you identify as in order to differentiate yourself and know what you like, or something to that effect. That's a very scientific way of phrasing it, all right? Transcribe that, publish it, okay?
I get what you're saying. I'm just like, if I was a 14-year-old in this climate, and so when I happen to be straight, but when I was like 13 or 14, I had to play football because, like, at my school you had to do a sport. I hated getting hit. I hated tackling. I hated the whole macho thing. I was like this fucking prepubescent, like, chubby. And I don't think it's necessarily helpful to tell a kid that if you have problems with these gender norms, the problem might be in here rather than out with society. And I'm worried that some of the essentialist language takes what should be a critique of society and says, just sort of repackages it. Like, I don't
disagree with that at all. I just think that it might be even a little bit more to it. Like, there's, a lot of people will feel like, I have a lot of things that I'm gender non-conforming with. I squeal like a little girl and cry children's cartoons a lot, and I'm perfectly fine with it. I'm still very comfortable in my own gender identity, and I would absolutely like society to make the changes that you think it is, but also I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. It's not just about, you like things that are traditionally associated with the opposite gender. For example, like non-binary people, they don't feel comfortable identifying as either thing, so why can't that be an identity that they adopt?
That's fine with me. What I'm a little bit more skeptical of is a 14-year-old who is told that because they feel discomfort being male or female, that necessarily means that the solution is adopting another identity, versus understanding they can be gender nonconforming. So I see two sides of this. Like, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Eastern Kentucky.
Okay.
Very conservative, small town.
I was going to say, that's probably not an easy place to be gay.
No.
If I can stereotype as a coastal...
Some stereotypes are correct.
Yeah. So I can see one version of this. One is, let's say that in 2020, the what would have been a gay kid, a gay boy 20 years ago, now identifies as non-binary. Maybe that's better because it gives that kid a label that other kids learn to respect. And they say, well, he's not a girly boy, he's non-binary. That's actually what other societies have done to, like, put people into a different box, to say, like, you're a guy, but you don't act like a guy. I think we should consider that makes it easier to be gender nonconforming, while also considering the possibility that in the long run, we should let kids who are male just be boys who happen to be girly. Like, I just think there's trade-offs that people don't acknowledge, because right now it's just like a this rainbow spray of like a million different identities. But at the end of the day, like you don't come to peace by finding the right identity. You come to peace by, it's this complicated negotiation of who you are, who your friends are, and who society is. And I think sometimes people rush to easy answers in the same way they might rush to easy answers in religion or in other forms of identity. So I think,
yeah, there's always going to be a really, really long and drawn out process of adopting your identity, because adopting an identity is fundamentally an interplay between your own personal lived experiences and the way and the societal constructs and context that that you're trying to make those two congeal and make sense. I mean, that's what an identity is. Like, you can't adopt an identity that wasn't introduced to you in some way, shape, or form by your culture. But likewise, like, something like your culture might not help you make sense of your own personal experiences. So it's often tough to mesh those two. So where am I going with this? I had an awesome thesis right at the end, and then I got distracted by something. What were you talking about? Maybe that'll get me back on track.
No, I mean, I'm just
trade-offs. Yeah, you got it.
Yeah, trade-offs. Yeah,
trade-offs. So of course there's going to be trade-offs, but those trade-offs, I think, are, in my opinion, worth it. Like, the more quote-unquote boxes that we let people pick, the more we can make sense of it. And hey, if there's a lot of boxes and a lot of them aren't getting used, they'll naturally fall out of favor. Like, so the joke is the 56 genders, or however many the joke is up to now, 72 or something like that. Who cares? If 75 of them don't, I'm sorry, if like 65 of them don't work, who cares? They'll fall out of use just like everything else.
Sure. I guess and again, this is not something I don't think I've ever written about or would spend. This is just in the spirit of our wonderful conversation and just throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. I guess my concern is some of the stuff I see online. I'm in my mid 30s. I don't know what the youths are up to, the Zoomers, but it seems like.
You see this hair? You think I know?
What are you? You're like 30ish?
I'm 30.
You're young. It seems to me like, let's say you have this spectrum of, over here you have like the most femme boys imaginable, and over here you have the macho jocks. It seems like a little bit of what's happening is like the kids who 20 years ago would have been girly boys are being told they're not really boys, they're non-binary or genderqueer. I don't think there's a major downside of it, but I think in the long run, if that meme catches on, it closes the spectrum of acceptable maleness. And as a male who is himself like not a macho jock type, I want that space to be as open as possible. That's all I'm saying.
But a lot of that could be like, for example, are you familiar with James Cantor's list of studies like showing detransitioning and stuff like that?
They're more on desistance.
Desistance. You're right. I should know.
They're similar concepts.
Yeah. So James Cantor studies on desistance. One, this dude can't read numbers. But a lot of those sources were pretty old. Like, for example, there was something called the Sissy Boy Syndrome. It's a book that I actually got from my university and read the entire thing.
Wait, can I obnoxiously interrupt you? Because I'll concede this point immediately, and I've written thousands of words about this. You can throw out all the old studies and just rely on the newer, bigger studies, and you get a similar result. Not 80% of kids desist, but it's real. But I agree with you. The list was a little bit. I think James could have presented that in a better way, and I think it's regretful the 80% statistic caught on, because I don't think we know the truth. A clinician I trust a lot once told me, like, this really stuck with me. All that matters is that the desistance rate is not close to 100% and it's not close to 0%. It just suggests there's some
that helps us so much, right?
In a sense, it does.
Yeah, I know. I gotcha.
No, but think about it. If the desistance rate was 100%, it'd be like, the kid's going to desist, don't socially transition him. If it was 0%, it'd be like, transition him right away. The whole reason there's some complexity here.
It's because it's not either or, yeah.
Yeah, it's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. I like my binaries. I don't.
You're a fan of the binary, are you?
Big fan of the binary. What was I going with that? No, so the only reason I brought up those is because you mentioned like kids like 20 years ago, for example. And this is a little bit older than that, like twice as old as that. But a lot of those kids, like, there just wasn't an option. There weren't those boxes. There wasn't that social context to help them make sense of their own personal experiences to adopt an identity that let them, mesh the two together. So most of the kids in the Sissy Boy Syndrome, which is the Green Book, which is actually a pretty good book. Like it's really sympathetic for considering the time it was written. But most of those kids, their parents and their social context were telling them, no, you can't even like be a girly boy. It's called the Sissy Boy Syndrome.
It's literally a disease.
It's literally a disease. If you are a boy and you adopt feminine behaviors, like, you know, playing with cooking utensils or liking princess movies, you know, those really horrible things that make you, if your little boy likes, you should take him to the doctor. Those are two examples that I remember off the top of my head because they stuck out to me so much. So
but by that same token, not to interrupt you again, but
okay, you're good.
So like in Samoa, there's a third gender called I'm going to mispronounce it. I apologize. Fa'afaiin, I think. And if a 3-year-old who's a boy acts girly, they say, you're not a boy, you're Fa'afaiin, you're this third gender. That has some problems of its own because you're taking a kid, you're putting him in another box without really him having an option. That's what I mean by trade-offs. Like, I'm not sure more boxes are always better. It depends how you define the boxes. I think it's great that we have a category of transgender for people who really can't live, you know, in accordance with the body parts they were born with. I think that's great. But yeah, I think I just remain a little bit sort of old man skeptical of the idea that more labels are always better or that they don't close off avenues to expand the boundaries of masculinity, which I think is really important. Because I think as a male, you're probably more aware of this than I am. You have all sorts of genuinely toxic messages shot at you. And I think some kids respond to that by being like, fuck this, I don't want anything to do with being male, versus other kids who have like a more deep-seated, just they're not boys, basically, in effect.
Oh yeah, and the thing is, I think you could do both at the same time. Again, this is an anecdote of my own personal experience. It means absolutely nothing in the broader context of things, but most of the people that I talk to are for both things. They want to expand, like, you know, if you identify as a man, doesn't matter like how manly you are. If you identify if that's an identity that makes sense to you, it's yours. Who gives a fuck? And well, I just got demonetized. I don't know if I cursed in this entire time, but and there it goes. Anyway, but
should I have not been cursing? Am I going to get you in trouble?
I can't remember. No, not in trouble at all. No. I was so some people were bringing it up in the chat. I was on the Kill Stream, an explicitly white nationalist podcast to debate a racist Nazi. That's monetized.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
Wait,
it's the only.
Or it's monetized.
It's monetized. It's the only debate I have that made money. That's making money. How is that? We can.
Did the white nationalist convince you?
No, he did not.
Okay.
Anyway, where was I going with that? But a lot of people that I talk to will also use that to defend trans people. Like, if you are a super like masculine, or mask presenting like trans woman, that's fine. If your identity as a woman is fine. They're expanding the boundaries of what it can mean to be a woman while existing on this continuum of masculinity and femininity.
One of my musical heroes is Laura Jane Grace. She's the front woman of a band called Against Me. I got to interview her, and she was sort of like a sequel to Caitlyn Jenner almost. Like, she was on Rolling Stone too. She's a little different. She's not a Republican. She's punk. She's a punk rocker, and that's what's interesting about her story. Is like, it was incredibly important for her to transition, and she has a memoir with a title I shouldn't say as a cis person. It's like a reclaimed slur.
Okay, I got you.
But her whole thing is like her whole life she had to live as a woman. She kept women's clothes like balled up in the back. It was just a desperate need. But then she transitioned, and she's like, now that I'm seen as a woman, I wear baggy pants. I wear like baggy shirts and like punk torn up stuff. So I think in that's expanding the boundaries of womanhood. But what I'm saying, her deal was never as simple as like, I'm a guy, but I want to act in a more feminine manner, or I don't like doing guy stuff. Maybe that's the distinction where I'm aligning a little bit. It's like the difference between having this deep-seated thing that never goes away and being like, well, gender norms suck. Because everyone knows, I don't think.
Well, most people think gender norms suck. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think that, I think if your only issue is that gender norms suck, I'm not sure you're going to find much peace just adopting another identity. That's my argument.
Yeah, and my argument will be that there is a difference between gender identity and gender expression. So,
yeah,
and I think that's the fundamental disconnect. Like, yeah, gender norms suck, but that more applies to like gender expression, like what you're quote unquote allowed to do, what is culturally permissible with your behaviors. That is distinct. It's related to, but distinct from gender identity. in the
Yeah,
sense
no,
that,
I'm saying I think some kids confuse them, and that's why I want
of
gender
course,
clinicians who, when a 15-year-old says I don't feel like a boy, will take a few sessions to unpack that a little bit, rather than assume there's something like wrong with the kid's current gender.
yeah, and even that's complicated. Like for example, in like the United States, like it's going to take me 5 sessions without insurance to figure out whether my kid is trans. You introduce a lot of like, yeah, really just fantastic parts of our medical system into the debate as well. So
Wonderful.
yeah,
That
so
that combination of an already marginalized group with like the worst first world medical system in the world is a lot of fun for everyone involved.
yeah, really, really fun. Everything's great. Everything's fine. Uh, so we're coming up on an hour. I know you can't stick around forever. So any, I felt like I talked in circles a little bit, and I really, really apologize for that. But I still had
No,
fun.
it's fun. Yeah,
Uh,
no, this was good. I was glad to talk to you. Yeah, I would just encourage like anyone who doesn't like my work on this, who's watching, you can always send me an email. I'm not hard to find. I don't react well to like the screw you bigot thing because I've gotten plenty of that, and I obviously at this point I don't think I'm a bigot. No bigots think they're bigots, to be fair, but I don't.
yeah.
So, but if people have good faith questions, I tend to respond to them. I've also talked about this on my podcast, Blocked and Reported, with my co-host Katie Herzog, also infamous to some. But other than that, no, I've had a good time, and yeah, I think more people should do stuff like this. And I like the sort of brand you're building of actually having these debates rather than having it all be Twitter sniping. Although in this case, the fact that I Twitter sniped at you was what gave birth to
It's
the
like
conversation.
you gotta. It's sniping every once in a while. Sometimes you get
Yeah,
it.
you got a high platform shut as a result of my snapping.
Here we go. Cool. So, yeah. I really enjoyed the conversation. For what it's worth, from me, I don't think you're a bigot. I still disagree with you on a lot of the interpretations that you've had, but that's, yeah, I'm sure the same thing is mutual, right? And that's perfectly fine. I don't think, and the reason I wanted to talk to you is I don't think that even when you write an article that I really don't like, it never seems like it's coming from a place of you're trying to lie or you always seem like you're acting in good faith, and I appreciate that. So I appreciate acting in good faith more than I appreciate agreeing with me, which seems like a platitude, but no, seriously, I would rather talk to a Nazi who is like open and upfront with their beliefs, because they're fun to dunk on, than I would with someone who disagrees with like most of what I say, or who agrees with most of what I say, but it's like weaselly about it.
Right.
I feel like a dirty centrist saying that, but it's a, yeah, but it's something that's sincere. So. I don't think I have any parting words other than what I just said. So rather than continuing to talk in circles like I've done this entire time, if you're okay with ending it there, I appreciate it, man. Thank you so much for coming to talk to me.
Thanks, man. I'll tweet this once the sort of final video is up. I appreciate it.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it's live streaming right now, so it should be as soon as we stop streaming, which I want to talk to chat for 5 or 10 minutes, but it should, depending on how terrible YouTube's being today, should be up like as a full video.
Cool. Thank you, and thank you to everyone who watched. I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you very much, Jesse. You have a good rest of your day, okay?
You
Do
too,
your
man.
book stuff. Get it done. Okay. A lot less combative than a lot of the conversations that I've had, which I think is good. Is there anybody who... so I've been looking at the chat a little bit. I know I have a lot of like Jesse's fans in here, which is pretty cool. If anybody anybody has any questions for me, go ahead and ask them here. I'm terrible about interacting with chat. I am not a good streamer, if that makes sense. So I apologize for that. So any questions in the chat for the last couple little bit? Why are we putting exclamation points in? I yelled at him to do his book stuff. That's why we had to push the debate back the first time. He had book stuff to do. All right, let me just scroll back. Let's see. Oh, thanks, Riley. Yeah, I'd love to get into some more contacts with all this fun stuff. So we'll see. Django's about to get canceled. If I didn't get canceled for talking with Sargon, I'm not gonna get canceled for talking with Jesse. Is there any empirical reason to believe that ROGD is an actual problem? So that was kind of, I don't know if you were here for the beginning of this. The only study out there on ROGD, to the best of my knowledge, is Littman, is the Littman study on ROGD. And this is not empirical evidence. In fact, hold on. Let me actually pull myself small here and bring up the Littman study here. So this is Littman revised. Where's Littman original? Hold on, let me pull up the original study. So yeah, let's pull up the study a little bit. So this is the original Littman study. And here's what it says. It is unlikely that friends on the internet can make people transgender. And then she says a bunch of stuff that, came from the study of the parents remembering that. Here's the highlighted outbreak. The cluster outbreaks of transgender identification occurring in friendship groups. This is something I'm glad I caught when he brought it up, because she did refer to transgender identification as a cluster outbreak, not just gender dysphoria. She said toward the beginning here, this is not a prevalent study and does not attempt to evaluate the degree to which this presentation, she's basically saying this cannot be a study that indicates empirical data that this is happening a lot. So this is in the original study itself. So what is it that leads people to think it's a problem, if not just transphobia? People like what it implies. Here's some fun stuff. These are all in a video, but that I've done. But here's some fun stuff. Let's pull up some. I don't know. Let's pull up some studies, or not studies, but articles written about this study when it first came out. So here's one from Breitbart. Study draws transgender ire, peer pressure, and prior psychiatric illness linked to gender issues in teens. This is how they described the Littman study. Yep, in the study, Lisa Littman. There's how they described it. All right, so that's one of them. That's how they described it, which is fine. Here's one from a Christian website. Parents beware. This is how they phrased it. Parents beware. Rapid onset gender dysphoria, a social contagion among girls. This is laughable. A new social contagion is inspiring teenage girls to become boys. A new social contagion. And this is just not what the study suggests whatsoever at all. I don't like the study in terms of how weak the evidence is. Again, there's plenty of studies with weak evidence out there, and it's hard to get. And actually, because science is hard, right? But the way for headlines exactly like this, if you're asking why people took the study and ran with it, because most evidence is not going to go in a transphobe's favor. So anything that can vaguely be twisted in going in their favor, they're going to latch on to really, really hard, and just a lack of scientific understanding and how to read studies in general. So. Read the correction apology, please, okay? So here's a correction. This was PLOS One. This was the journal that published both the original paper, which is what I have pulled up right now, and the revised paper, which is what I have pulled up here. So this is the correction that PLOS One did. So after publication, questions were raised. Given the nature of the issue of this case, let's see. Basically, the primary position here. Emphasis, this is study of parental observations which serves to develop hypothesis. It's a small change, but here's what the study was. Rapid onset gender dysphoria in adolescents and young adults. The way this is phrased, it makes it seem like this is a thing. This is like a medical diagnosis. This is something that exists instead of a hypothesis that something exists. This is what they changed it to. Parent reports perceived to show signs of a rapid onset of gender dysphoria. This seems so small, but in terms of how people are going to read it, because remember, a lot of those articles were referencing the original. That it seems like a small change, but this is actually a hugely important distinction between the two. It screams motivated reasoning. It is absolutely motivated reasoning. Again, I don't want to pretend to know what Littman's like true motivations are, but there's a lot of stuff that seems like it was. I mean, she was absolutely. I mean, here. So here's something. Why did I don't know what happened here. I'm clicking around too much. I'm going crazy. Going crazy over here. Let me fix this. So here was the letter that Jesse actually sent me this. And this was the response to the criticisms that she got. The language in this is really, in my opinion, pretty loaded. Oh. So, for example, here's a resource. Here's a link that she gives. So, several young women who identified as transgender during their adolescence and have since desisted or transitioned have publicly stated that the phenomenon described in Littman was consistent with their own lived experiences with gender dysphoria, including that social media contributed to their transgender identification. The Peak Resilience Product. What do you think this is? What do you think the Peak Resilience Product is? Just in case, this is the Peak Resilience Product. It's for people. 4 people. This is what she just brought up as evidence. All 4 of us experienced intense adolescent gender dysphoria. So that's it. And of course, they recommend Fourth Wave Now. The explicitly, he disagreed with this, but I still think Fourth Wave Now is pretty explicitly transphobic. For more information on ROGD, yeah. So this is her source to show that no, she was definitely right about it. It's a website of 4 people. So, perfect. Yeah, Peter Warner. Yeah, again, there's always going to be bad clinicians, and you can always find anecdotes. And this is and to say that this doesn't happen, that people aren't pushed in the medical field towards something that might be a little bit too quick or just not right for them, I think it's untenable to say that doesn't happen. What we're concerned with, though, when we're talking about societal problem, is how prevalent is this? And is this indicative of a broader population? And you have to be careful with, because a lot of people that I meet online, and again, Twitter is probably not the best platform to get a representative sample of how people actually think. But a lot of people are using this study, especially the original, as proof that people are tricked into being trans. Like, for example, have you ever heard the narrative that trans is being pushed on children? A lot of that comes from this study, even though the study explicitly does not say that. Oh, Peter, 4 people? No, 4 people. So let me bring that up again. So here is the resource, the Peak Resilience Project. I'm clicking on that to show you that it's here. So this is the source that she just listed to show that, definitely kids are coming out and saying I'm right. And this is what that links to. This is the about page, but this is 4 people. That's it. All 4 of us. So her proof is a website of 4 people who endorse her specifically. That's bad data. This is what makes me really question her. I don't like personal attacks. I question her integrity to a certain extent. Maybe one day I can actually get in and talk to them. So we'll see. So, okay, so peak resilience is anecdotal? Yeah, 100%. Yeah, the data is... This is what really rubs me the wrong way about Lisa Littman. Specifically, I had inklings, like, for example, like her... So here's the original article, and way down here, way down here, supporting her acknowledgments. I don't like that she thanks Lisa Marciano. I don't like this at all. Lisa Marciano is pretty explicitly transphobic. If you want to check it out, check out Lisa Marciano. Her Twitter handle, if it hasn't been taken down. She retweets LGB Alliance, or at least she used to, a lot. She pushes a lot of TERF talking points. I think it's safe to call her a TERF. And this is someone that she wanted to thank for feedback on the manuscript. or sorry, yeah, for feedback on earlier versions of the manuscript. So I don't like that. I know that's not proof of anything, but I really don't like that. And then in this updated letter that she wrote, letter to the editor, this was a response to R.J. Restar, who also goes to Brown. She was a PhD student, who I referenced in my video on the Littman study. A lot of the contentions that Restar had aren't brought up in this. Like, she's just saying, like, no, my methodologies were fine, but a lot of the problems kind of weren't addressed. Like, the biggest one was the a priori assumptions, the a priori knowledge of what you're going to get. And yeah, this kind of smells like motivated reasoning to me, which just, why do I keep doing that? This doesn't seem like it's good science to me. Okay, anybody else have a question? Or want me to go over anything else, or have any more questions? Not even just about any of these sources that I have pulled up. I did it again. My computer is just doesn't like doing all this stuff while streaming. Um, there's actually a lot of stuff done on I don't like saying transgenderism. There's actually a lot of stuff done on transgender identities. Like, here's I want to bring over my one. So here's a list of sources that I brought up during my last debate. Like, look at this stuff. A lot of these are meta-analyses. So these aren't just individual studies. A lot of these are meta-analyses of other studies. And this is something that I threw together. You can see, like, date modified. I threw a lot of these together at the last minute. This is just based on what I knew of the topic. This isn't even a fraction of a percentage of the research out there. It's not really the Wild West anymore. The oldest one I have here is hold on, let me pull up the oldest one I have. Come on. Transsexual surgery follow-up status in the 1990s. This was published in 1990. Go ahead. So this is a 30-year-old study. It's as old as I am. Yeah, it's as old as I am. And look what it says. Let's see. Let's go here. Come on. I highlighted it. Yep. So the results of their study, 97% were favorable. This is in 1990. So this is not Wild West. This is old stuff. And this is referencing older papers, too. Like, they reference other people here. Yeah, Green and Monet. Yeah, so this is not the Wild West anymore. Hey, none of these are from Iran? I don't think so. What was this published? Richard Green, by the way, is the one who wrote The Sissy Boy Syndrome. It's a provocative title, but I've actually read it. It's a pretty sympathetic book. It's out of date, obviously, but it was pretty sympathetic, especially for the time. What do you make of his attitude to social elements influencing people's responses to things like Littman's study? What is wrong with, like, social elements influencing you? We're social creatures. I'm actually My next video is going to be on exactly this topic, so I already had a little bit of an opinion in the chamber. I don't. People too often conflate a social influence with something bad or something that's not real. Like, for example, like, language is 100% a social construct by any measure of the word. Do you think language is not real, or that it's a bad thing? It's not as real as something that is quote unquote physical. And a lot of people will say that, well, if you have been influenced by your society to adopt a certain identity or to behave a certain way, it must not be as real than if you weren't influenced by your society. But here's the thing about that. If you were not influenced by your society, the only thing you can be is a dead baby. The only thing that you can be without influence from your society, without influence from your environment, is a dead baby. So that argument does not hold any weight for me. Like, for example, religions absolutely would not. You would absolutely not have a religious identity without some sort of environmental influence, without some sort of cultural influence. Do you think that if you were born in the woods, you would adopt like you would find the Bible organically without ever having been exposed to it? No, but nobody says that. And well, some people, like edgy 14-year-old atheists, say that the religions appear contagion. No one says that. But there's different levels of socialization, of course, but I mean, different levels of how you are socialized and how that influences you, I don't think is the same thing or even correlated with bad and stuff like that. Dead baby hot take. It's true. Like, without influence from your environment, what can babies do? Can they like go out and feed themselves and like take care of themselves? No, they need influence from their environment. Oh yeah. So I do think that someone who's just picked up something from their friends over a few months is very different from deep socialization. Could be. But again, is it bad? And this is why they talk to the need to have a qualified professional talking to them. Lots of trans people don't like the argument that gender has a social element. I so this will come out in the video, so I don't want to spoil it too much. But everything we do has a social element. It's a failing of our advocacy. Well, there's no disconnect in my mind between society and genetics. To me, there's no meaningful disconnect. Like, where does environment end? Where does nurture end and nature begin, and vice versa? To me, they're a Mobius strip. They don't. You can sort of see where they're different, but in reality, they are each other. Like, there's no meaningful difference between nature and nurture. So, and yeah, I'm just spoiling my next video about that. So, um, could be bad if you're making lifelong changes based on a temporary infatuation. Yeah, could be, but might not be either. Okay, y'all. I think I'm gonna end the stream here. Let's see. I don't know about genetics being the basis. Yeah, next video. I have a lot to say about that, and I'm really excited to put it out there. Yeah, Tom. That's basically it. Everything is affected by society and genetics at the same time. There's not an either or scenario here, and that's why I brought this up with Jesse, and I'm glad he agreed. Like, it doesn't matter if it's a choice or not. It's like, for me, I don't like the being gay is not a choice argument for why we should accept gay people, because if it was 100% a choice, what would that change? Why would that be different whatsoever? Like, why would that meaningfully change how we ought to approach sexual orientation? To me, it shouldn't. So, all right, y'all. I'm gonna get off here. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate it. And so let's see if I can stop a stream on the actual correct sentence. So I want to hit stop in OBS, right?